Welcome to my Stingray Paint With Me tutorial. In this video, we are going to be painting a purple stingray with a blue abstract background. This tutorial is for my Colouring Club members. If you haven't joined yet, you can join via my website kobeandmore.com. Once you've joined, I will send you a watercolour page for you to paint and a paint sample so you can follow along with this tutorial. All you will need is 2 paintbrushes, 1 small round and 1 medium round. And of course 2 water dishes, one for washing your brush after you've used the purple and one for washing your brush after you've used the blue. So if you have all of these things ready, let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is paint a light blue wash across the background, leaving the stingray white. So add a lot of water and a small amount of pigment and use your medium round brush to completely paint the background. Once the background is completely covered, let it dry so that we can start the next step. Once the blue wash has dried, we are going to add some more blue shading. You may or may not have noticed, but the background pattern for this artwork is a spiral. So what we are going to do is, starting on the outer edge of the spiral, we're going to use lots and lots of dark pigment. And then as we move towards the center of the spiral, we are going to use less pigment so it gets lighter and lighter towards the center. I have sped this up to ×16 speed so I can show you what I'm doing. As you can see, I'm using lots and lots of dark pigment to paint all the way around the outer edge of the spiral. And then as we get to the next layer of the spiral, what I'm going to do is use dark pigment towards the outer edge and then lighten it towards the center of the shape. What I am trying to do is match the shade of the outer edge to the shape next to it so that the gradient gets lighter and lighter towards the center of the image. This way, the background behind the stingray will be light, making the stingray pop out and be the featured element of the artwork. A great way to create a gradient effect using watercolor is to use the wet on wet technique. So what you're going to do is paint the shape with water first and then get some pigment on your brush and add it to the outer edge of the shape. The pigment will flow into the area that you've painted with water, and then you can use your brush to move the pigment around so you have more pigment on the outer edge of the shape and less pigment towards the inner edge of the shape. See how the pigment just flows into the area that is wet, but it won't go into any area that is dry. It doesn't matter if your water is already tinted a little bit blue. I actually quite like that because then I can really see where I have put down my water. This is where having 2 water dishes comes in handy, because you wouldn't want to be putting water on the page if it had the other color pigment in it. So when you have completed the spiral and let it dry, we can start the next step. So the next thing that we are going to do is paint the stingray purple. For this step, you really do need a very fine paintbrush, because I did put the dots on the stingray a little bit too close, so it is a difficult task to paint around the dots. I apologize for that. But first, what we're going to do is paint around the wing. Is it called a wing? The fin of the stingray? I don't know what it's called, but we're going to paint it with a very, very dark shade of the purple pigment. So using your small brush, we're going to paint all the way around the edge and then continue to paint into the body of the stingray. Okay, let me just speed this up so that you can see the whole process. Once you have completely painted all the way around the wing or the fin or whatever it is called, we're going to move on to the head and the nose, beak. I'm not really sure what the anatomy of a stingray is, obviously. But anyway, for the head, we are going to paint darker towards the bottom of the shape and lighter towards the top of the shape. So you can see what I did here was add a light shade of purple over the entire shape and then added more dark purple pigment to the bottom of the shape and blended it upwards. So again, we're creating a little bit of a gradient for the head shape. Then for the nose, we're doing the same thing, but this time I added darkness towards the center of the body and then towards the end of the nose, I wanted that to be lighter. So I completely painted the nose with a light shade of purple, ready to add a gradient to the nose. And then I took a little bit of a detour and went back to the head shape because I decided that I needed to add more darkness to the head shape. So I added more dark pigment around the bottom of the head shape, and I also added a small amount of darker pigment around the edge of the shape just to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And because the paint is still wet, I'm able to blend that into the rest of the paint. Okay, now we're back to the nose. So like I said before, we are going to paint darker pigment on the edge of the shape that is towards the center of the stingray, and then blend it out so it's lighter towards the end of the nose of the stingray. Again, I'm not sure if it's called a nose or a beak. I really should look these things up before I do these recordings. Give me a minute and I will just go and look it up. Okay, it's actually called a snout. So I was wrong both ways. It's a snout. But anyway, moving on. Once you've finished painting the snout, we're going to move on to the stingray's body. And I'm going to speed this up again because all we're doing here is just painting the whole body of the stingray with a very, very dark shade of purple and leaving all of the dots white. Like I said earlier, the smaller the paintbrush, the better for this part because the dots are quite close together. So it's a little bit difficult to go around them without getting the purple pigment on the inside of the shape. I did paint one of the shapes with purple, and that's this little bit underneath the tail. So I painted that with a light shade of purple, but all of the rest of the shapes I left white. And now that the body is done, we are going to move on to the fins. And yes, I did look that up. It is fins, not wings. Although I really do like calling them wings because when you see a stingray swimming through the water, it does look like they're flying. So I like wings, but we're going to go with fins. So for the fins, it's a similar process to painting the body. We do want a very, very dark shade of pigment and we are going to leave all of the dots white. But the difference between the fins and the body of the stingray is that we want the pigment to be much darker around the edge of the fin and we want it to be lighter towards the center of the fin. So let me speed up this video and I'll show you what I mean. So as you can see here, I'm painting with a lot of dark pigment around the edge of the fin shape. So that is around the edge towards the outside and the edge towards the body of the stingray. And then I use more water and less pigment towards the center of the fin. One thing to note is that I don't use dark pigment along the edge where it's in touch with the other fin, as I wanted to keep the contrast between the two fins nice and clear. So you can see one is in the foreground and one is in the background. So once I've completely covered the fin in purple pigment, I used a little bit more pigment just to make sure that that is nice and blended, making the edges dark but keeping the center of the fin light. So next we are going to add some shading to the body of the stingray. So where the gills of the stingray are and the mouth of the stingray, we're going to add a small amount of purple pigment using the medium round brush. Then we're also going to add a little bit of shading to the top of the fin in the foreground, just to give that little bit of dimension, but we're going to keep the center of the body nice and white. I changed to the smaller brush here just to add some little purple details to the tip of the stingray's fin. And that's it, we've painted the stingray. For the final step, what I did was to add some dark blue pigment to the outside border. I wanted the border to be quite dark because I wanted to have that nice contrast between the border and the blue background, and I had started the edges of the blue background quite dark, so I wanted it to be even darker. I did this in layers, so I kept painting around and around and around the border until I had the color that I liked. You can choose how dark or how light you want the border. It's completely up to you. And that's it for this one. We have completely painted this stingray artwork. I can't wait to see your designs. Please share them with me on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. My handle is @KobeAnnMoore. And let me know if you enjoyed this tutorial in the comments. Thank you for painting with me.